and welcome to Tim Conley Drums. Thanks so much for tuning in. It means so much to me when you guys come aboard and listen to me talk for 20-25 minutes about all the different adventures I've had as a musician and as a professional drummer. I want to tell you guys today about the tough times that I have been through. I'm doing well. I've been doing well for quite some time, other than my hand situation. But I went through some serious hardship years ago. I lived in an abandoned home that was scheduled to be torn down, but I secretly lived there. I lived in a studio, a rehearsal studio, again, illegally. I secretly lived in a rehearsal studio. I lived in my car. I even lived in a barn, an abandoned barn for a while. So let me tell you guys about some of the things that I've been through. The last, 20 years, 25, probably longer than that, probably 30 years, everything's been pretty good for me in terms of my living situation and whatnot, and I've done well, and I've become successful as a musician. So it was a hard road many years ago when I didn't have any money, struggling artist, and the reality of living paycheck to paycheck, or in my case gig to gig, was very real. So I'll start by telling you that I have been married once before and divorced, and paying child support for my two older girls. So paying the child support drained me financially pretty heavily to the point where if it wasn't for my mother, I probably wouldn't even have survived. My mom was my go-to when times got really tough. Now, the thing is, though, there were times where I just couldn't do it anymore. It's hard being an adult. And of course, as soon as I would go to her house, she would tell me to get a real job. That this problem would be over if I could get a real job. And in some ways, she was right. And I did get a real job. I'm not going to get into that too much, but I did work other jobs years ago, other than just being a musician, to survive, because I really couldn't survive without it. Because back in the 80s and 90s, even though the music scene was thriving, I wasn't thriving because of having to pay an immense $1,200 a month child support order, which was huge. And that's what forced me to live in such strange situations. So let's get to the abandoned house. So years ago in Burlington on Beach Boulevard, I'm driving around one day and I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do, because I don't really have anywhere to live, whatever. And I decide I'm just going to go down to the beach area, sit out on the sand, and just think and try to figure stuff out. Okay. While I'm down there, I decide to go for a little bit of a walk along the beach. As I'm walking along the beach, I see this sort of semi-boarded up house. So we're talking 1992, 93, something like that, before I actually went to music school. And I see this boarded up house, and I decide I'm going to go check this place out. So I go and check the place out, and I discover that I can actually get into it. And I wander around the place, and then I think to myself, I think I can stay here. So I decide to check the place out. I know this is crazy, but I decide to check the place out in terms of, are there people coming and going? Because I don't want to be set up in there at 2 o'clock in the morning and some drunken idiots show up and they're, hey, what are you doing? This is my place. I don't want any of that sort of thing. But I was desperate at the time. I didn't have any money. I was struggling. I was working as a musician, and I was working another part-time job, but I was struggling. That $1,200 a month was killing me. And I didn't, like I said, being an adult male, I just didn't want to be at my mother's house and listen to her whining and complaining at me, even though I deserved it. But I'll tell you about, moving forward from those days as well. This was the tough times, and then there was good times. So anyways, I sort of scoped the place out, and I end up going there at different times of the day. So I'm there, I check it out for the next, I don't know, probably 5 days I checked it out. Where I'm there at 2 in the afternoon, I'm there at 11 at night, I show up at 5 in the morning, this sort of thing, just to see, is there anyone else scoping this place out in any way, shape, or form? Well, it turns out there wasn't. There was nobody else there. So I grabbed my knapsack and my sleep gear, and I took the place over. Now, it had no heat, it had no hydro, nothing like that. So I had to come up with, basically it's like camping, but I actually am in a shelter. Now, what ended up happening was I stayed there for 4 months until it just got too cold for me and I had to move on. Probably 5 months. I was there for quite some time on that property, and nobody knew that I was there until one day I was kind of moving this fridge around, and I damaged one of the walls when I was moving this fridge around. And the damage was open to the outside. So I guess the owner of the actual property came by one day when I wasn't there and noticed this damage and thought, I think somebody is living here. Well, he was right, because I got caught. Now, the guy was actually quite gracious to me. I explained my situation to him. I told him, please don't call the cops on me. He didn't. He understood my situation, and he let me stay. Now, he wouldn't let me stay there in the winter just because it's just too darn cold, and he didn't want me running heaters and whatnot. I didn't have any, and he wasn't prepared to power the place up for me to plug stuff in. So he did let me stay there. And, it was 5 months living on the beach. It was my beach house. Like I said, times were tough back then. After that, I was living in my car for quite some time, on and off at my mother's house, living in my car. I can remember my daughters complaining about how the car was a mess because I was living in it. And it was hard for me, and it was hard for my daughters back in those days. Now, my daughters never, ever went to any of these places that I stayed in. They never stayed in my car. They didn't do any of the things that I was doing. I would always take them to my mother's house, or if I actually had a place, then they would come to my house. So usually they would go to my mother's house because they had all the comforts there, and of course my mother would completely look after them and treat them like royalty. And my mom, God rest her soul, she was a lovely, lovely person, one of the most wonderful people that I've ever known. Her and my grandmother, Grandma Wilson, her mother, they were two of the most amazing women that I've ever known. And they were, unfortunately, my grandmother only met my oldest daughter. She died when she was 1, so my oldest daughter never got to really know Grandma Wilson. But my mom was very close to my daughter. She died in 2003. So my youngest daughter was 13, my oldest daughter was 16, or my second youngest daughter, sorry. So they got to spend some time with my mom, and they were very close to her. And I miss my mom incredibly. She, like I said, she was an awesome lady, and she put up with a lot dealing with this guy. Now, there were also times where I lived in a rehearsal studio in Mississauga, illegally. I was in a band, of course, and the band had a rehearsal spot, and we decided to rent it out on a monthly basis where we could come and go 24 hours a day as we pleased. Now, they specifically said to us, of course, you can come here anytime you want, you can spend as much time, but you cannot officially move in. This cannot be your residence. There can be no mail coming here. You cannot cook. You cannot have fires. You cannot, be doing any hard drugs or anything like that, but I've never been into the drug thing at all. Anyone that's watched my channel, I talk about it incessantly. I don't drink, I don't do drugs, I don't smoke, none of that. So that was never an issue. However, as we're all nodding going, yeah, it's just for rehearsal. It was initially. But over time, with my situation, I slowly started spending more and more time there to the point where I was pretty much moved in. Now, the management there at the place started to notice me, and I realized that, oh geez, they are seeing me a lot, because there was no bathroom in the actual rehearsal room itself. So I would always have to go out of the room, down the hall, down another hall to get to the bathroom. And of course, oftentimes I would run into the workers, the management, the owner, whatever, you name it. It was quite a large rehearsal place. The only thing that was annoying was having to listen to all the really crappy bands rehearsing in there. And I mean crappy, like, oh, it was horrible. The noise, constant noise, all hours of the day, because I couldn't complain. It's a rehearsal place. Plus, 2 o'clock in the morning, there'd be bands rehearsing, because it was open 24 hours, this place, for the purpose of rehearsal. So here I am in my rehearsal room. I had a bed set up in there that I would take down and set up every day, because I didn't want them to know, I didn't want them to see an actual bed, because then they would go in that room. Anybody, they had access to it, they had full access to it, because even though it was our room and we were paying a monthly lease for it, they had full access to it, because it was not deemed a living space. So they had full access to it. So I had to secretly have this cot that I would set up and tear down every day so that I wouldn't get busted. So here I am, in and out of that place, trying to get sleep at 2 o'clock in the morning when bands are just cranked up, double kick metal bands going crazy at 2, 3 in the morning, and I had to sleep through that. It was very, very difficult. And then of course, you know, my bandmates, they also would sometimes hang out there. Sometimes a couple of them would stay for 2 or 3 days. You know, I was literally living there, but like I said, I was trying to disguise myself as much as possible. It was very difficult, but I did manage to do it for quite some time, until I actually got approached by one of the workers, and he's basically said to me, man, I always see you here. Like, he was kind of joking, like the old, man, I always see you here. Like, where do you live, kind of a thing, right? And I was like, I just told him I live in Milton, because that's where my mother lived. I just said, I really like the vibe here, and you know, I'm always practicing my drums, and which was true. I was actually practicing drums a lot in that room, because it was a rehearsal space. So yeah, I could play drums anytime. That was one huge advantage. I could play the drums that were set up there at any time, because that was our room. We decorated it. We had all our gear in there. Those were my drums in there, not their drums, even though their drums were in there too, but I just took them down and put them to the side, set my drums up in there, and I would practice night and day. So my skill levels were increasing, that was for sure. And, you know, we used to practice all the time, because how could I say no to a band rehearsal? I'm already there. So anyways, this guy, you know, where do you live, man? You're always here. I see you every day. And, oh, I live in Milton, you know, whatever. Okay, cool. See ya. Take care. And then I'd say about 2 weeks later, a guy comes up to me, the manager, and says to me, you know, it's been brought to our attention that you're here an awful lot. We understand that, you know, you guys rent on a monthly basis, but you realize that you can't live here. This can't be living. Oh, of course I denied it. I don't live here, whatever. Okay, just so you know, you can't live here. But now I'm thinking, they're watching me. They are on to me. Now, I'm going to tell you guys something. My daughters know about this, but a lot of my family members don't know about this. A lot of my family, my brothers and sisters, aunts, uncles, whatever, they've always seen me in a different light than what maybe they thought. I went through some hard times. They know, of course, my sister's brother, whatever, they all know that I went through a divorce and I went through some hard times, but they don't know about what I'm telling you guys right now. It's unfortunate that I'm telling you this, and some of them, particularly my sister Shirley, who watches this channel, she's finding out for the first time that I lived and I was homeless at certain points in my life. Now, she knows that I was very financially strapped because of the situation, and she knows that I went through hell. She's also gone through divorces, and she understands the whole mental process and depression and everything you go through. Like I said, my mom saved me time and time again. And then when I went to music school, that saved me because my mom helped me. I went to music school in 1994, and I got a place to live. My mom set me up with a place, and I had a roommate, my friend, actually. I had a roommate. He didn't live there very long, and he ended up leaving, and I was on my own, which was fine because I preferred to be on my own. I was used to being on my own, to be totally honest. So I lived by myself in Hamilton near Mohawk College, where I went to music school, and my mom saved me. She's always been my hero. She always looked out for me. She always saved me. But I'm telling you guys about living situations that my other members of my family don't know about. They're going to be finding out for the first time right now. So there was also a time where I lived in a barn. Now, how the hell do you live in a barn? Well, it's just like that abandoned house. I just out wandering around, I discovered this barn, and of course it's attached to a home. And I started talking to people at a local pub in the area, or a bar, and they started telling me about the house is abandoned. Now, I couldn't get into the house. The house was all boarded up, whatever, locked up, whatever. And actually, it wasn't boarded up, it was just locked up. So I thought somebody lived there. Yes, I'm confusing it with another place. I actually did think people lived there. So while I did check the barn out, I was nervous to go there because I thought for sure there was no animals in the barn or anything, but it appeared to be an active, being used barn. So, I went and checked it out, whatever, but I didn't stay there very long until I discovered from these people that the place is actually abandoned. So I thought, well, it's out in the country, it's abandoned, nobody's going to be in that barn. So again, I spent months in this barn, again, living off of, camping style of living. Now, mind you, what's funny is I still love camping to this day, and I camp year round. It's another thing that my family members may or may not know about me. I'm a little bit secretive in some ways, even though I now am spilling the beans on my video, on my YouTube channel, on all my videos. But I camp constantly. My son and I, it's our bonding, and I have another YouTube channel called Connolly Outdoors, and I video all our camping, and I love it. But back in pre-music school days, back in the late 80s and early 90s, when I was going through divorce, we split up in 1990 with 2 kids, young kids. I think they were 4 and 6 months at the time. We split up, and I went my way, she went her way. She had the kids, I paid child support, but they visited me. Standard spiel for a divorced couple, especially back in those days. So I did go through some difficult and tough times, but like I said, my daughters didn't experience it as heavily as I did, obviously, because like I said, I would take them to my mother's or somewhere where they wouldn't be involved in living in a barn or living in an abandoned shack. Now, they did know that I lived in my car because they would come in the car and realize, holy geez, this place is full of stuff, So moving forward though, after music school here in Canada and in the US, things looked up for me because I became more established, if you want to call it, in the music scene. And I continued my journey. I never gave up. Despite all the hardship that I went through when I was young, I never gave up. I continued to pursue music, and I also had another job. Like I said, I worked part-time. I'm not going to get into the details of that job, but I did have another job that helped me get through everything. Then one day, something happened that was absolutely shocking and unbelievable. My ex-wife called me up and said, I think the kids are better off with you. Now at this point, I had come back from a tour with loads of money in my pocket, and I bought my first house. So this would be around 2000 I bought that house, 1999, around there. I bought my very first house. So I go from, homeless to living in a barn, cars, abandoned houses, and now I rented for a while. I saved some money up. My mom gave me about $5 or $6 grand to put towards the house. Next thing you know, 1999 was the big turn for me. I got approved. I got approved for a mortgage, and I buy my first house. And I was settling down, and I was doing quite well. And I've done quite well since then. I've owned many houses. I've owned several houses. I even owned a cottage for a while. So I've done well since 1999. But pre-99, from about 84, from the end of high school up until 99, it was a severe struggle for me. I went through a lot of hard times. So she calls me and says, I think the girls are better off with you. And like I said, I was in a much better financial and housing situation. So I said to her, well, if I don't have to pay child support anymore, I'll do it. Like, absolutely. And I would have done it anyways, but because I wanted my daughters to be with me and they wanted to be with me, and I think that they were better off in the long run being with me. It was a difficult situation that they were in with their mother, and she got remarried and they didn't care for the husband, and it was a difficult situation for them. So my daughters come and live with me, and things were great after that, moving forward. And then of course I met my second wife around 2005-ish. Yeah, January 2005, I think it was. And then we got married. I have 2 young kids with her, and of course everything has been great since then. I mean, you always have your ups and downs, whatever, but I'm not living in a shack. I live in a beautiful home in a beautiful neighborhood, and I'm still doing, I'm only a musician. I don't have another job. I quit that old job of mine years and years ago, and I don't do that other job. I've only ever truly worked as a musician for the last, 15, 16 years. Previous to that, I was a musician, and I had a part-time job as well, just to try and survive to some degree. But, guys, being a musician, I know what you're going to say in the comments, stick with your day job and all that. And a lot of you are correct, especially in this day and age. But I had such a drive and such a passion for music that I just could not give it up completely. And in the end, everything worked out. Like I said, I went through some hard times, but in the end, and since 1999, everything's worked out for me. And all my kids are doing well, and I tell them all not to become a musician. Do not follow in your father's footsteps. I want them to get more into professional careers and be university educated and all that stuff. Now, I am educated in music, and I also have another diploma as outside of music, and I'm educated, but my main education is in music. I never went to university. I went to music school, specializing in music and whatnot, and I pursued a career based on the training that I got to become a professional musician. Now, do I have regrets? Yes and no. Sometimes I wish that I had pursued other things, because being a musician, a lot of times it's a grind, it's a hustle. You're constantly having to get yourself out there and get people to know you and whatever. However, the no is I'm doing something that I love. I enjoy working as a musician. And yes, financially, there's been bouts of suffering, but for the most part, I've done quite well for myself. but I've had to work hard, really hard, to do that. Most people would just give up. I mean, you know, they would just give up because they just don't want to be in horrible situations. I never did. I never gave up. I always just struggled through, and it paid off for me in the long run. So anyways, guys, I want to apologize to my sister who's finding out things about me that she didn't know. I'm guessing, I don't think she knew about me living in that homeless situation. I don't think she ever knew that. My mom probably never talked about it. I mean, my mother knew, but I kept it quiet. Nothing to be proud of, you know. My daughters obviously knew. They didn't know about the homeless situation, I don't think, as much when they were younger. I told them about it when they became adults, but when they were younger, actually experiencing it, I don't think they knew that I was living in the situations that I was living in. I can pretty much guarantee that. Anyways, guys, thanks a lot for joining me today in another crazy story. I know, it's a screwed up life that I've lived. It's just, when I tell my son these stories, he just can't believe it. Because my son and my daughter, my young son, my daughter, they live a very normal, nothing crazy life. And when I tell them the stories about the things that I've gone through, they just shake their heads. They can't believe it. But it is what it is, you know. Anyways, thanks a lot for joining me today. And as always, keep drumming.